The morning of the attack dawned gray and cold over most of the Earth. Clouds hung low, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. In resistance bunkers and hidden camps across every continent, fighters checked their weapons one last time and said their final prayers at exactly 6 o'clock, Greenwich Mean Time. The world exploded. In South America, resistance cells attacked every Valorian position simultaneously. In Europe, saboteurs destroyed power stations and communication hubs. In Asia, thousands of fighters emerged from hiding and struck enemy patrols across 36 countries. In Africa, the accumulated weapons of 6 months of raids were finally unleashed. The Valorians had faced attacks before, but nothing like this. This was not a raid or an ambush. This was war on a scale they had never experienced. Alarms blared in every command center. Officers screamed for reinforcements that could not arrive in time. For the first time since the invasion began, the aliens were overwhelmed. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Vexter stared at the holographic displays in disbelief. The entire planet was on fire. Hundreds of reports flooded in every minute, each one describing another disaster. His forces were stretched thin across too many fronts, unable to concentrate enough strength to crush any single attack. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are primitives. They should not be capable of this level of coordination." Admiral Crick stood beside him, his face pale. "Supreme Commander, we have underestimated them. Again, they have been planning this for months. Every cell, every fighter, every weapon they have collected, they are using everything at once. Then, we will respond with everything we have. Order all units to defensive positions. Launch orbital strikes on the largest concentrations of enemy forces." But the orders took time to reach scattered units. Communications were jammed or destroyed. Valorian soldiers who had grown used to easy victories found themselves fighting for their lives against enemies who seemed to know exactly where they would be and how they would respond. While the ground burned, a small ship slipped through the chaos. General Maria Santos sat in the pilot's seat of the captured transport, her mechanical arms steady on the controls. Behind her, 19 of the best fighters humanity had ever produced waited in silence. They wore captured Valorian armor and carried weapons hidden inside their bodies. Each had undergone surgery to implant Dr. Okonkwo's gravity devices beneath their skin, weapons that no scanner could detect. The transport rose through Earth's atmosphere and headed toward the fleet. Santos watched the warships grow larger on the view screen. There were hundreds of them, dark and terrible, blocking out the stars. Any one of them could destroy her little ship in an instant. "Approaching checkpoint," Captain Okonkwo reported from the sensor station. "Broadcasting our stolen codes now." This was the first moment of truth. If the Valorians had changed their codes, if someone recognized that this particular transport had been reported missing, if anything went wrong at all, they would die in a flash of plasma fire. Seconds passed. Then a voice crackled over the radio. "Transport 473, you are cleared for approach to the Eternal Dominion. Proceed to Docking Bay 12. Santos released a breath she did not know she had been holding. "Acknowledged, Control." Proceeding to Bay 12. The transport glided between the massive warships, tiny and insignificant among the giants. Santos could see the Eternal Dominion now, the largest ship in the fleet. It was nearly 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, surrounded by layers of protective vessels. It looked invincible, but nothing was truly invincible. Santos had learned that in 6 months of war, everything had a weakness. You just had to find it. The transport docked without incident. As the team prepared to disembark, Santos gathered them for final instructions. "We have 3 hours before the global attack loses momentum. In 3 hours, the Valorians will regain control of the situation. We need to destroy this ship before that happens. She looked at each of them. Stick to the plan. Move fast. And remember why we are here. Sergeant Tanaka drew her hidden blade, a thin piece of sharpened metal that had been implanted in her forearm. For Earth, she said quietly. For Earth, the others repeated. The airlock opened. They stepped onto the Eternal Dominion. The docking bay was busy with activity. Valorian soldiers and workers rushed back and forth, responding to the crisis on the planet below. No one paid attention to another group of soldiers in captured armor. Santos led the team through the corridors, following maps that Marcus Lee's hackers had stolen from Valorian databases. The Eternal Dominion was a maze of passages and chambers, but they had memorized every turn, every junction, every security checkpoint. The first guards died before they could raise an alarm. Sergeant Tanaka moved like a shadow, her blade slicing through alien throats in perfect silence. Lieutenant Hassan's soldiers followed, killing with precise efficiency. By the time they reached the central elevator shaft, they had eliminated a dozen Valorians without firing a shot. Captain Okonkwo worked on the elevator controls. Security systems are detecting inconsistencies in the docking bay. They will know something is wrong soon. How long do we have? Santos asked. Minutes. Maybe less. Then we move faster. The elevator dropped toward the lower decks. The reactor core was located at the bottom of the ship, protected by multiple layers of security. Each layer would be harder than the last. The doors opened onto a corridor filled with Valorian Marines. These were elite soldiers, the best the Dominion had. They had been positioned to guard the most critical systems of the ship. The fight that followed was brief and brutal. Santos activated her gravity device, and a wave of force threw 3 Marines against the wall. Sergeant Tanaka leaped among them like a dancer of death, her blade finding gaps in armor with impossible precision. Lieutenant Hassan's soldiers fired captured plasma rifles at point-blank range, but the Valorians fought back hard. Their weapons roared, filling the corridor with deadly energy. Humans fell, their lives ending in flashes of light. The Russian sniper died protecting Captain Okonkwo. The Brazilian medic was cut down while trying to help the wounded. By the time the corridor was clear, only 8 of the original 20 remained. Santos did not pause to mourn. There was no time. Keep moving, she ordered. We are almost there. They fought through 2 more checkpoints, losing another soldier at each one. By the time they reached the reactor chamber, only 5 of them remained. Santos, Okonkwo, Tanaka, Hassan, and an Indian explosives expert named Priya Singh. The reactor chamber was enormous, a cathedral of alien technology. At its center, a column of pulsing light stretched from floor to ceiling. This was the heart of the Eternal Dominion, the source of all its power. If they could destroy it, the entire ship would be torn apart. But between them and the reactor stood Supreme Commander Vexter himself. The Zelthari had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 900 star systems. They had conquered more than 300 different species. Some of those species had once been proud warriors. Some had been peaceful farmers. Some had been great thinkers and builders. It did not matter what they had been. Now, they were all servants of the Empire. The Zelthari believed in a simple truth. The strong ruled. The weak served. This was not cruelty to them. This was simply the way the universe worked. Stars burned and died. Planets formed and crumbled. And the strong took what they wanted from the weak. It had always been this way. It would always be this way. High Arbiter Velthos sat upon the eternal throne on the homeworld of Zelthar Prime. He was old even by Zelthar standards. His scales had turned from bright purple to a deep gray. His 4 eyes had seen the rise and fall of countless rebellions. He had watched species beg for mercy. He had watched them fight and die. In the end, they all knelt. They always did. On this particular day, a messenger brought news that barely interested him. Scout vessels had detected radio signals from a small planet in an unremarkable part of the galaxy. The planet orbited a yellow star. The species living there called themselves humans. Velthos looked at the report with little concern. Another primitive species. Another world to add to the Empire. The scouts had observed these humans from a distance. They had not yet developed faster than light travel. They were still bound to their single planet. They fought wars among themselves. They polluted their own air and water. They were, in every way, unremarkable. Send an incorporation fleet, Velthos commanded. Standard protocol. Standard protocol was simple. A fleet would arrive. An ambassador would descend. The primitives would be given a choice. Surrender and serve, or resist and die. In 12,000 years, the choice had always been the same. Sometimes a species fought at first. Sometimes they tried to resist. But in the end, they all surrendered. The Empire's technology was too advanced. Its fleets were too powerful. Resistance was not just futile. It was illogical that Ambassador Kethra was chosen to deliver the Empire's message. She was young and ambitious. This would be her first successful incorporation, a stepping stone to greater assignments. She felt almost bored as her shuttle descended through the blue atmosphere of the planet called Earth. The humans had detected the fleet's arrival. Their primitive instruments had spotted the massive ships entering orbit. Their radio transmissions had become frantic. Kethra listened to them with amusement. They were afraid. They were confused. They were exactly what she expected. She landed in a field near one of their largest cities. The humans had gathered a welcoming party. Soldiers in primitive uniforms. Leaders in formal clothes. Machines that recorded everything. Kethra stepped out of her shuttle and looked at them with all four of her eyes. The humans were small, soft. They had no scales, no claws, no natural weapons. They shivered slightly in the cold air. They looked at her with a mixture of fear and wonder. One of them stepped forward. He was older, with gray hair and a lined face. He spoke in a language that Kethra's translator easily interpreted. "Welcome to Earth," the man said. "I am Secretary General Marcus Webb. We represent the United Nations of this planet. We come in peace and hope that you do as well." Kethra almost laughed. Peace. How sweet. How naive. How Nelly. "I am Ambassador Kethra of the Zelthari Galactic Empire," she replied. "I do not come for peace. I come to deliver terms." The human's face changed. The hope in his eyes dimmed. But he did not run. He did not cower. He simply waited. "The Zelthari Empire claims this world and all who live upon it," Kethra announced. "You will surrender your governments. You will surrender your resources. You will be assigned a place in our hierarchy based on your usefulness. Those who comply will live. Those who resist will be destroyed. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact." She waited for the reaction. The tears. The begging. The desperate attempts to bargain. She had studied recordings of past incorporations. She knew how this went, but the human did something unexpected. He laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was short and bitter. He shook his head and looked at Kethra with something she did not recognize. Was it anger? No, that came later with conquered species. This was something else. Something strange. "No," the human said. Kethra tilted her head. "I do not understand." "The answer is no. We will not surrender. We will not serve. You can take your terms and leave our planet." For a moment, Kethra was silent. She had been trained for this assignment. She had studied hundreds of first contact scenarios, and none of them had a species simply said no. Not like this. Not with such calm certainty. Species begged. Species bargained. Species offered tribute to delay the inevitable. They did not simply refuse. Perhaps you do not understand, Kethra said slowly. We have ships in orbit that can destroy your cities in seconds. Your weapons cannot reach us. Your technology is thousands of years behind ours. You have no chance of victory. Surrender is your only logical option. The human called Webb looked up at the sky. He seemed to be thinking about her words. Then he looked back at her. You are probably right, he said. We probably cannot win. Your ships are bigger. Your weapons are stronger. You have conquered hundreds of species. We are just one small planet. He paused. But we are not going to surrender. We are going to fight. And maybe we will lose. Maybe you will destroy us. But we will not kneel. We will not serve. That is our answer. Kethra stared at him. She searched for the trick, the deception, the hidden strategy. There had to be something she was missing. No species chose death over submission. It went against every survival instinct. It made no sense. You are willing to die? She asked. All of you? Your children? Your elderly? Everyone on this planet? We are willing to fight, Webb replied. Dying is the worst case. But living on our knees is not living at all. We learned that lesson a long time ago. Kethra returned to her shuttle in silence. She reported to High Arbiter Velthos. She described the conversation word for word. She waited for his wisdom to explain what she had witnessed. Velthos listened with growing irritation. This was unusual. Species did not behave this way. It was inefficient. It was illogical. It was annoying. They are bluffing, he declared. They hope to negotiate from a position of false strength. Show them the reality of their situation. Then they will submit. The order went out to the fleet commander. Standard demonstration protocol. Select the target. Destroy it. Show the primitives what real power looked like. The target chosen was a coastal city called Snowpollo. It was large and densely populated. Its destruction would send an unmistakable message. The humans detected the fleet's movements. Their communications became desperate again. They tried to contact the Imperial ships. They sent messages of peace. They sent warnings. They sent pleas. The fleet ignored them all. On the surface, the people of Snowpollo went about their daily lives. Mothers fed their children. Workers went to their jobs. Students sat in classrooms. Old men played cards in the parks. They had heard rumors about the aliens in orbit. They had seen the news coverage of the ambassador's visit. But life went on. What else could they do? Then the sky turned white. The Imperial ships fired their weapons. Concentrated beams of energy struck the city from above. Buildings melted. Streets vaporized. The water in the bay turned to steam in an instant. 40 million people died in 17 seconds. They did not have time to scream. They did not have time to pray. One moment they existed. The next moment they did not. Where Snowpollo had stood, there was now only glass. The heat had been so intense that the sand and soil had melted and fused. A circular wound in the earth, still glowing orange at the edges. The message had been sent. Kethra returned to the surface. She expected different humans this time. Broken ones. Crying ones. Ones ready to accept the inevitable. She landed at the same field. The same soldiers and leaders waited for her. But something had changed. Secretary General Webb was there again. His face was pale. His hands trembled slightly. But he was not crying. He was not begging. When he looked at Kethra, his eyes held something that made her uncomfortable. Something she had never seen in a conquered species. It was hatred. Pure, cold, absolute hatred. 40 million people, Webb said. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. Mothers, children, old people who had never hurt anyone. You murdered them to make a point. They died because you refused to submit, Kethra replied. More will die unless you change your answer. Surrender now, and no more demonstrations will be necessary. Webb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was harder, colder, like something inside him had frozen solid. You want our answer? He said. Here is our answer. We are going to fight you. We are going to hurt you. We are going to make you regret the day you found our planet. It might take years. It might take generations. But we will never stop. We will never surrender. And one day, we will stand over the ashes of your empire and remember Snow Paulo. Kethra felt something she had not felt in years. A small chill running down her spine. She told herself it was the cold air of this strange planet. Nothing more. You cannot defeat us, she said. You lack the technology. You lack the resources. You lack everything. Webb smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. We shall see. Kethra returned to the fleet and made her report. High Arbiter Velthos received the news with confusion. The demonstration should have worked. It always worked. 40 million deaths should have broken the humans completely. Give them time, Velthos decided. Let them bury their dead. Let them count the cost. They will come to us eventually. Fear always wins in the end. He turned his attention to other matters. The humans were a minor problem, an annoyance. The Empire had conquered 300 species. It would conquer one more. There was no hurry. But on the planet below, something was happening that the Zeltari did not understand. Could not understand. The humans were not mourning. They were not falling into despair. They were not turning on each other in fear and blame. They were uniting. Across the planet, old enemies reached out to each other. Nations that had fought wars for centuries now shared resources. Scientists who had competed for prizes now shared research. Factories that had built consumer goods now built weapons. Every country, every government, every organization focused on a single goal. The humans had received a message from the stars. They had learned that they were not alone in the universe. They had learned that there were beings out there who saw them as nothing more than insects to be crushed. And they had decided, collectively and absolutely, that they would rather die than accept that judgment. In secret laboratories, human scientists studied the wreckage of an Imperial drone that had crashed during the demonstration. They took it apart piece by piece. They analyzed every component. They did not understand everything they found, but they learned faster than anyone could have predicted. In underground bunkers, human generals planned strategies for a war that seemed impossible to win. They studied the Imperial ships through telescopes. They mapped their patrol patterns. They calculated their weaknesses. They made plans within plans. In homes and schools and churches, ordinary humans looked up at the sky with new eyes. The stars were no longer mysterious and beautiful. They were the territory of an enemy. And humans had always been good at taking territory. High Arbiter Velthos checked on the human situation periodically. His scouts reported that the primitives seemed to be building things. Ships, perhaps. Weapons, definitely. He found it amusing. Let them build their toys. Let them believe they had a chance. It would make their eventual submission all the more complete. He had ruled for hundreds of years. He had seen species fight and fail countless times. He knew how this story ended. The humans would resist for a while. They would lose a few battles badly. They would count their dead and realize the truth. And then they would kneel, just like everyone else. What Velthus did not understand was that humans were different. Not because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced. They were different because they believed something that the Zelthari had never considered. They believed that the strong did not always win. They believed that the powerless could rise. They believed that determination and will and sheer stubborn refusal to quit could overcome any obstacle. They had stories about this. Legends passed down through generations. Tales of small groups defeating great empires. Stories of underdogs who refused to stay down. These were not just entertainment to humans. These were blueprints, instructions, reminders of what was possible. The Zelthari Empire had conquered 300 species. They had built an empire that stretched across the galaxy. They had ruled for 12,000 years. But they had never encountered a species that had spent its entire history fighting against impossible odds and somehow, against all logic, winning. The war was coming. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the Empire was about to face an enemy that would not kneel. Secretary General Webb stood in a secret command center deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland. Screens showed data from around the world. Construction projects, research developments, training programs, recruitment numbers. Everything was accelerating. Everything was coming together. An aide approached him with a report. The first prototype was ready. A human ship capable of leaving the solar system. It was crude. It was ugly. It used principles that human scientists had barely understood 2 years ago. But it worked. Webb looked at the image of the ship on the screen. It did not look impressive. It looked like a collection of spare parts held together by hope and determination. But it was theirs. Humanity's first step toward the stars. How long until we have a fleet? He asked. 80 months, the aide replied. Maybe less if we push harder. Push harder, Webb said. Push as hard as you can. And then push harder than that. He thought about Snow Paulo, 40 million people. Gone in seconds. Families erased. Lives ended. Dreams destroyed. He thought about Kethra's arrogant face. Her casual dismissal of human life. Her absolute certainty that humans would submit like everyone else. She had been so sure. She had been wrong. Webb looked at the screens showing humanity's preparations. Ships being built. Weapons being designed. Soldiers being trained. An entire species focusing its energy on a single purpose. The Zelthari had given humanity a choice. Kneel or die. Humanity had chosen a third option. Fight and win. 1 light year from Earth. A distance that would have taken conventional rockets thousands of years to travel. He had crossed it in an instant. Control, this is Chun, he transmitted. Jump successful. I'm 1 light year from home. The control center erupted in cheers. Scientists hugged each other. Military officers wiped tears from their eyes. Secretary General Webb stood in the corner, watching the celebration with a grim smile. It was not enough. Not yet. 1 small ship making 1 small jump. They needed fleets. They needed weapons. They needed everything. But it was a start. The next year passed in a blur of activity. Shipyards in orbit produced vessels at an impossible rate. The designs improved constantly as engineers learned what worked and what didn't. Crews were trained in simulators that ran 24 hours a day. Weapons were tested in the outer solar system, far from Imperial sensors. The Zelthari continued to watch. Their scouts noted the growing human fleet with interest, but not concern. The ships were crude. The technology was primitive compared to Imperial standards. Yes, the humans had managed to develop faster than light travel surprisingly quickly. But their ships were slow and weak. Their weapons were underpowered. Their shields were thin. A fleet of such vessels might be annoying. It could never be a threat. Ambassador Kethra reviewed the reports with a mixture of amusement and contempt. She had been promoted after her successful first contact with humanity. The fact that the humans had not yet submitted was considered a minor detail. They would submit eventually. They always did. They learned quickly, she admitted to her colleagues. Faster than any species I have seen. But learning is not the same as mastery. They copy our technology without understanding it. Their ships are imitations of ours. Poor imitations. Our colleagues agreed. Humans were clever. That made them potentially useful as servants. But clever was not the same as dangerous. The Empire had faced clever species before. It had faced all kinds of species before, and it had conquered them all. What the Zelthari did not see was what happened inside the human ships. They could not detect the spirit that filled every crew member. They could not measure the determination that drove every engineer. They could not understand the rage that burned in every heart. The humans knew their ships were inferior. They knew their weapons were weaker. They knew their shields were thinner. They did not care. Admiral Maria Santos commanded the first true human battle fleet. 62 ships. A tiny force compared to imperial armadas. She'd have been a submarine commander before first contact. She had spent her career hiding in the depths, waiting for enemies that never came. Now she commanded ships that sailed between the stars. She gathered her captains for a briefing before their first mission. They met in the hangar bay of her flagship, the Snow Polo Memorial. The name had been chosen carefully. Every ship in the fleet was named for a city or person lost in the demonstration. Every crew member carried a personal connection to that day. "We are going to fight," Santos told them. "We are going to fight an enemy that is stronger, faster, and more experienced than us. Many of us will die. Perhaps all of us will die. But we will not die quietly. We will not die uselessly. Every one of us will take as many of them with us as possible." She looked at their faces. Young and old. Men and women. People from every nation on Earth. They looked back at her with steady eyes. No fear, no hesitation. Only purpose. "The Zelthari believe they know how this story ends," Santos continued. "They believe we will surrender like all the others. They believe we will learn our place. They believe we are just another species to be conquered." She paused. "They are wrong. We are humanity. We do not surrender. We do not give up. We do not stop fighting until we have won or we are all dead." A captain raised his hand. "What if we are all dead?" Santos smiled grimly. "Then others will take our place. The Zelthari have given us a gift. They have shown us what happens if we lose. We will not lose. But even if this fleet is destroyed, another will be built. And another after that. And another after that. We will keep coming until we win or until there are no humans left to fight." The captains nodded. They understood. This was not a battle. This was the beginning of a war that would end only when one side was completely destroyed. Back on Earth, Dr. Vasquez continued her work. She had not stopped since the project began. Her health was failing. Doctors told her to rest. She refused. There was too much to do, too much to learn, too little time. She was working on something new, something that even the Imperials didn't have. A weapon that could change everything. "The power core generates more energy than we need for propulsion," she explained to her team. "Much more. We have been wasting that excess. But if we could focus it, concentrate it, direct it," she showed them the calculations. A weapon that could punch through Imperial shields. A weapon that could destroy Imperial ships with a single shot. A weapon that would make humanity's inferior ships deadly. The problem is stability, she said. The energy levels are so high that the weapon tends to explode. One of the younger scientists raised his hand. So we need to control the energy better? Vasquez shook her head. We need to not be on the ship when it fires. There was silence as the implications sank in. She was proposing a suicide weapon. A ship that would sacrifice itself to destroy an enemy. The Zelthari will never expect it, Vasquez continued. They value their lives too highly. They fight to survive. They cannot imagine an enemy that would choose death to achieve victory. But humans can. Humans have always been willing to die for what matters. She was right. Throughout human history, soldiers had thrown themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Pilots had crashed their planes into enemy ships. Defenders had fought to the last person rather than surrender. This capacity for self-sacrifice was something the Zelthari had never encountered. The weapon was developed in secret. It was installed on select ships crewed by volunteers who understood exactly what they were signing up for. They did not hesitate. They did not complain. They were honored to be chosen. The human fleet grew. 62 ships became 100. Then 200. The quality improved as well. Each new generation of ships was better than the last. Faster, stronger, more deadly. And still the Zelthari watched and waited and did nothing. High Arbiter Velthos had decided to let the humans exhaust themselves. Let them build their fleet. Let them train their crews. Let them believe they had a chance. Then, when the Empire finally decided to end the game, the fall would be all the more crushing. He did not understand that every day of delay made humanity stronger. He did not understand that the humans were not simply building ships. They were building a war machine unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. He did not understand that the lesson he had tried to teach humanity had been learned. Just not in the way he intended. The Empire had taught humanity that the universe was cruel, that the strong crushed the weak, that power was the only thing that mattered. Humanity had learned this lesson well, and now they were ready to teach a lesson of their own. Admiral Santos received her orders on a quiet Tuesday. The fleet was ready. The crews were trained. The weapons were loaded. It was time. All ships, she transmitted. Prepare for jump. Destination: Outer Solar System. We're going to introduce ourselves to the Imperial Third Fleet. 500 Imperial warships waited at the edge of the solar system. They had been stationed there since first contact, watching, waiting, ensuring that no human vessel escaped their sphere. They were about to meet their students. The lesson was about to begin. The message reached Earth hours later. Secretary General Webb watched the battle recordings with tears in his eyes. So many dead. So many brave men and women who would never come home. But they had not died in vain. Word spread quickly. The first battle against the Empire had been fought, and humanity had won. Celebrations erupted around the world. People danced in the streets. Strangers hugged each other. For the first time since Snow Paulo, there was hope. In the Imperial capital, the reaction was very different. High Arbiter Velthos received Fleet Commander Yethavol's report with disbelief. 212 ships lost. To a primitive species. To creatures that had achieved faster than light travel only 2 years ago. How is this possible? He demanded. Yethavol stood before him, his scales pale with shame. They do not fight like any species we have encountered. They do not value survival. They throw their ships at us without regard for their own lives. Every engagement becomes a battle of attrition that we cannot sustain. Cannot sustain? Velthus's voice was cold. The Empire has thousands of ships. They have hundreds at most. But they can replace their losses faster than we can ours, Yethavol explained. Their production capacity is extraordinary. And their crews are eager to die. Our crews are not. Morale is becoming a problem. Velthos was silent for a long moment. This was unprecedented. The Empire had never retreated from a lesser species. The political implications were severe. "We will send the Fifth Fleet to reinforce you," he decided. "Another 1,000 ships. That should be sufficient to end this resistance." "With respect, Arbiter," Yethavul said carefully, "I'm not sure it will be. The humans are not fighting to survive. They are fighting to win. And they believe they can. That belief makes them more dangerous than any enemy we have faced." Velthos dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "They are primitives. They got lucky. Send our full might against them, and they will break like all the others." He was wrong, but he would not understand how wrong he was until it was too late. On Earth, the shipyards worked around the clock. New vessels were completed every day. Crews trained in simulators until they could fight in their sleep. Weapons improved with each iteration. Shields became stronger. Engines became faster. And volunteers lined up by the millions. Every ship that was built had 100 applicants for every crew position. People did not want to stay on Earth and wait. They wanted to fight. They wanted revenge for Snowpaulo. They wanted to show the universe what humanity was capable of. Dr. Vasquez watched the preparations from her hospital bed. Her health had finally failed. The months of endless work had taken their toll. But she smiled as she reviewed the reports. The weapon she had designed was being installed on more ships. The suicide vessels, they called them. Ships crewed by volunteers who knew they would not return. Ships carrying weapons capable of destroying Imperial vessels 5 times their size. "Suicide is the wrong word," she told a visiting admiral. "Those crews are not killing themselves. They are buying victory with their lives. There is a difference." The admiral nodded. He had seen the recordings of the first battle. He had seen Captain Okonkwo's final charge. He understood. "How many ships do we need?" he asked. "To win this war completely?" Vasquez considered the question. "The Empire has thousands of warships, but they have never lost more than a handful in any engagement. They are not prepared for the kind of losses we can inflict. If we can destroy enough of their fleet, fast enough, their morale will collapse. Their subject species will see weakness. The whole structure could fall. How many? I estimate we need to destroy between 3,000 and 4,000 Imperial ships in the next 2 years. After that, the political situation in the Empire will become unstable. They will have to negotiate. 3,000 to 4,000 ships. At current exchange rates, that would cost humanity over 1,000 vessels of their own. Hundreds of thousands of lives. The admiral did not flinch. "We'll do it. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes." Those 3 words had become humanity's motto. Their prayer. Their promise. The war continued. More battles were fought. More ships were destroyed. More people died. But the exchange rates held. And slowly, battle by battle, the impossible became possible. The Empire could not understand. Their analysts studied human tactics. Their scientists examined human technology. Their philosophers debated human psychology. None of them could explain what they were seeing. How could a species that had been pre-spaceflight just 3 years ago challenge the greatest empire in galactic history? How could creatures so fragile, so short-lived, so apparently weak, fight with such ferocity and determination? The answer was simple, but the Zelthari could not see it. Humanity had nothing to lose. The Empire had taken everything. 40 million lives in Snowpaulo, the illusion of safety. The dream of peaceful exploration among the stars. All gone. And when you had nothing left to lose, you could do anything. You could throw your ship at an enemy cruiser and detonate your own reactor. You could charge into certain death with a smile on your face. You could fight an empire and win. The humans had learned a lesson from the destruction of Snow Hollow, not the lesson the empire intended, not the lesson of submission and fear. They had learned that they were mortal, that they could be killed, that the universe was dangerous and hostile. And they had decided that if they were going to die, they would die on their feet, fighting, taking as many enemies with them as possible. That was the nature of humanity. That was why the Empire would fall. The Imperial Third Fleet hung in the darkness at the edge of the human solar system. 500 warships, each one a masterpiece of Zelthari engineering. They had been built to conquer. They had been built to dominate. They had never known defeat. Fleet Commander Yethaval sat in his command chair and reviewed the day's reports with bored efficiency. The humans were building ships. The humans were training crews. The humans were preparing for a war they could not possibly win. Yethaval had seen this pattern before. Every conquered species went through the same stages: denial, anger, desperate preparation. And finally, acceptance thought the humans were still in the desperate preparation stage. They would move to acceptance soon enough. They always did. His tactical officer interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, I'm detecting energy signatures at the system's edge. Multiple contacts." Yethaval leaned forward slightly. "Human ships?" "Yes, Commander. I count." The officer paused, checking his instruments. 62 vessels. They appeared to be approaching our position. A ripple of amusement went through the bridge crew. 62 ships against 500. The humans had courage. Yethaval would grant them that. Stupid, suicidal courage, but courage nonetheless. "Shall the First order the fleet to battle stations?" the tactical officer asked. Yethaval considered the question. It would be good practice for his crews. They had been sitting idle for too long. A quick skirmish would sharpen their skills and remind the humans of their place. "Yes," he decided. "All ships to battle formation. But tell them not to destroy the humans too quickly. Let them see what they face. Let them understand the magnitude of their mistake. Then we will crush them." The Imperial fleet moved with practiced precision. 500 ships formed into perfect geometric patterns. Weapons charged. Shields activated. Targeting systems locked onto the approaching human vessels. Yethaval watched the human fleet draw closer. Their ships were ugly things. Asymmetrical and rough, like they had been welded together from spare parts. They moved without grace, their formations loose and imprecise. They looked like exactly what they were: the desperate creations of a primitive species trying to reach beyond its abilities. "Open a channel," Yethaval commanded. "I want to speak to their commander." The connection was established. A human face appeared on his screen. A woman with dark skin and silver hair. Her eyes were hard. Her expression was calm. "I am Fleet Commander Yethaval of the Zelthari Third Fleet," he announced. "You have exactly one chance to surrender. Take it, and some of you may survive. Refuse, and you will all die. The choice is yours." The human woman smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It reminded Yethaval of a predator baring its teeth. "I am Admiral Maria Santos of the Human Defense Fleet," she replied. "And I have a message for you, Commander. For every life you took at Snow Hollow, we will take 10 of yours. For every tear we shed, you will shed a river. This is not a battle. This is a reckoning." She ended the transmission before Yethaval could respond. The battle began moments later. The first wave of human ships charged directly at the Imperial formation. Yethaval expected them to fire their weapons from a distance. That was how space combat worked. Ships exchanged fire from safe ranges, wearing down each other's shields until one side broke. But the humans did not fire. They just kept coming. "What are they doing?" the tactical officer asked, confusion in his voice. Yethovel shook his head. He did not know. This was not any tactic he had ever seen. The lead human ship was a small vessel, barely a tenth the size of an Imperial cruiser. It was heading directly for Yethovel's flagship at full speed. Imperial weapons fire struck it repeatedly, but it did not stop. Its shields failed. Its hull began to break apart. Still it came at the last moment. Yethovel understood. Evasive action. All ships, Ivas. The human ship rammed directly into the Imperial flagship's engine section. The collision alone would have been devastating. But the human ship's reactor had been deliberately overloaded. When it struck, it detonated with the force of a small sun. Yethovel's flagship did not have time to raise additional shields. The explosion tore through its hull like paper. Fires erupted across every deck. The ship listed hard to port. Its propulsion systems destroyed in the chaos that followed. More human ships followed the same pattern. They did not fight like prey. They did not try to survive. They threw themselves at Imperial vessels with suicidal determination, detonating their own reactors on impact. The Imperial fleet's perfect formation dissolved into chaos. Ships that had been positioned for optimal weapons coverage now found themselves vulnerable to ramming attacks from unexpected angles. Commanders who had trained for disciplined exchanges of fire had no protocols for enemies who wanted to die. Admiral Santos watched from her command deck as the first phase of the battle unfolded. 18 human ships gone in the opening minutes. But they had taken 47 Imperial vessels with them. Better than expected. Phase 2, she ordered. All remaining ships, engage at close range. Do not give them room to maneuver. Make them feel our presence. The human fleet close to point-blank range. This was insane by any standard military doctrine. At such distances, Imperial weapons could not miss. Every human ship would be hit repeatedly, but at such distances, human weapons could not miss either. The battle became a brawl. Ships fired at each other from hundreds of meters away instead of thousands of kilometers. Hulls scraped against hulls. Explosions created chain reactions that damaged friend and foe alike. The clean, efficient warfare that the Zeltari had perfected over millennia became ugly, bloody, and chaotic. And in chaos, the humans thrived. Imperial officers froze when their standard tactics failed. They had been trained for a specific kind of combat. When that combat became something else, they did not know how to adapt. Human officers had no such limitations. They had grown up studying wars. Real wars. Messy, brutal conflicts where nothing went according to plan. They knew how to improvise. They knew how to adapt. They knew how to win when winning seemed impossible. Captain William Okonkwo commanded a small destroyer called the Lagos Honor. His ship had taken heavy damage in the initial exchange. Life support was failing. Weapons were offline. Propulsion was reduced to a single engine. A larger Imperial ship was pursuing him. Its weapons charged for the killing blow. Okonkwo looked at his crew. Young men and women. Some injured. All afraid. But none of them suggested surrender. None of them asked to run. Can we reach them? He asked his helmsman. If we divert all remaining power to the engine, yes. But we'll have nothing left for shields or weapons. Okonkwo nodded. Do it, ram speed. The Lagos Honor turned toward its pursuer. The Imperial ship fired, expecting its prey to attempt evasion. But the human vessel did not evade. It accelerated directly into the weapons fire. Beams of energy tore through the Lagos Honor's hull. The bridge decompressed. Half the crew died instantly. But the ship kept moving. Newton's laws did not care about casualties. The Imperial cruiser tried to turn away, but it was too late. The Lagos Honor struck its center mass at full speed. Both ships died together. Across the battlefield, scenes like this repeated again and again. Human ships that should have retreated instead attacked. Crews that should have surrendered instead fought to the death. Every Imperial ship destroyed cost human lives. But the Imperials were not prepared for an enemy that considered its own survival secondary to victory. Fleet Commander Yethovel had survived the initial attack on his flagship. He had transferred to another vessel and tried to regain control of his scattered forces. What he saw terrified him. The Zelthari had conquered 300 species. They had fought countless battles, but they had never faced anything like this. Conquered species fought to survive. They valued their lives above all else. When defeat became certain, they surrendered. It was the logical choice. It was the sane choice. Humans did not make the sane choice. Humans made the choice to win. All ships retreat. Yethovel finally ordered. Fall back to Rally Point 7. We need to regroup. His officers carried out the order with visible relief. The Imperial fleet disengaged, jumping to faster than light as quickly as they could. Behind them, the wreckage of the battle drifted through space. Broken ships, human and Zelthari alike, spread across thousands of kilometers. Admiral Santos surveyed the aftermath. 51 human ships had been destroyed. 11 remained functional. The toll was catastrophic by any normal measure. That they had destroyed 212 Imperial vessels. The mathematics were clear. At this exchange rate, humanity could win. It would be costly. It would be bloody. But it was possible. Damage report, she requested. Her executive officer, a young man named Lieutenant Park, checked his displays. 11 ships still combat capable, Admiral. We're low on ammunition, and our shields are nearly drained. We cannot sustain another engagement. Santos nodded. She had expected as much. Set course for home. We'll repair, rearm, and come back for more. As her battered fleet limped toward Earth, she recorded a message for command. It was brief and to the point. First engagement complete. Enemy retreated. We took heavy losses but inflicted heavier ones. Human forces can compete with Imperial technology. Repeat, we can compete. Send more ships. Send more crews. Send everything you have. This war can be won. The Imperial forces fought with everything they had. They were defending their home, their families, their entire civilization. For the first time, they understood what the humans had felt at Snow Hollow. For the first time, they were the ones with everything to lose. But it was not enough. Admiral Chun's fleet was smaller. Her ships were weaker. Her technology was inferior. But her crews were willing to die. And Imperial crews were not. When human ships were crippled, they did not surrender. They kept fighting until they were destroyed. When Imperial ships were crippled, their crews evacuated. When human captains faced certain death, they charged their enemies. When Imperial captains faced certain death, they tried to retreat. The difference was decisive. On the sixth day, the last Imperial defensive platform fell. The orbital space around Zelthar Prime belonged to humanity. Admiral Chun broadcast a message to the surface. High Arbiter Velthos, your fleet is destroyed. Your defenses are gone. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. If you do not, we will begin bombardment. She was bluffing. Humanity had decided long ago that they would not become what they fought. They would not glass cities. They would not murder millions to make a point. But Velthos did not know that. He agonized for 59 minutes. His advisors argued. Some wanted to fight to the death. Others wanted to negotiate. A few simply wanted to run. In the end, Velthos made the only choice he could. He surrendered. The broadcast went out to the entire galaxy. Every world, every station, every ship received it simultaneously. High Arbiter Velthos, ruler of the greatest empire in galactic history, announced the unconditional surrender of the Zelthari to the human forces. The conquered species watched in stunned silence. Then, slowly, the reality began to sink in. It was over. The Empire had fallen. They were free. On 40 different worlds, celebrations erupted. Beings who had been slaves for thousands of years danced in the streets. They wept. They laughed. They screamed with joy. On Zelther Prime, Admiral Chun prepared for the surrender ceremony. She could have demanded anything. The Zelthari were completely at her mercy. She could have enslaved them as they had enslaved others. She could have destroyed their cities as they had destroyed Snowpolo. She could have taken revenge in 1,000 different ways. She chose something different. The ceremony took place on the steps of the Eternal Throne, where Zelthari rulers had sat for 12,000 years. High Arbiter Velthos walked down those steps, each one a monument to conquests past, and knelt before a human woman who had been born on a planet that had not achieved spaceflight until 3 years ago. Billions watched the broadcast. Across the galaxy, beings held their breath. "Rise," Admiral Chun said. Her voice was calm. Not triumphant, not cruel, just calm. Velthos stood. He could not meet her eyes. "The war is over," Chun said. "But I want to understand something. I want to know why. Why did you attack us? Why did you destroy Snowpolo? Why did you think you had the right?" Velthos was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thin and tired. "We have ruled for 12,000 years," he said. "We have conquered 300 species. We have never known defeat. We believed that power gave us the right, that strength justified everything, that the universe itself had ordained our dominion. And now?" Chun asked. "Now I see that we were wrong. Power is not right. Strength does not justify cruelty. The universe ordains nothing." He paused. "You have taught us a lesson we never wanted to learn." Chun nodded slowly. "We did not want to teach it. We wanted to explore the stars in peace. We wanted to find friends among the galaxies. You took that from us. You killed 40 million of our people to make a point. You tried to break us." Her voice hardened. "You failed." Velthos flinched. "What will you do with us? Will you enslave us as we enslaved others? Will you destroy our cities? Will you take revenge?" Admiral Chun looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No, we will not become you. We will not conquer or enslave. We will not rule through fear." She turned to address the cameras, knowing that the entire galaxy was watching. "The Zelthari Empire is dissolved. All conquered species are free. The Zelthari will return to their own worlds and live as they choose, but they will never again dominate others." She paused, letting her words sink in. The galaxy has lived under tyranny for 12,000 years. That era is over. What comes next is up to all of us. But I can tell you what humanity offers. Partnership, not dominion. Trade, not tribute. Friendship, not fear. We will help any species that wants to rebuild. We will defend any species that is threatened. And we will never, ever forget what happens when power goes unchallenged. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, the implications began to sink in. The Empire was gone. The structures that had organized galactic civilization for 12 millennia had collapsed. Chaos would follow. Suffering would follow. The transition would be hard. But freedom would follow too. On Zelther Prime, High Arbiter Velthos was escorted to a holding facility where he would await trial for war crimes. As he walked, surrounded by human guards, he asked the question that had haunted him since first contact. What are you? How did you do this? How did a species so young, so primitive, so fragile, defeat an empire that has stood for 12,000 years? The guard who answered was a young woman. Her name was Sophia Santos. She was the daughter of Admiral Maria Santos, who had died leading the assault on the Imperial Fifth Fleet. She was the granddaughter of refugees from São Paulo who had escaped the city hours before it was destroyed. "We are human," she said simply. "We are what you made us when you burned our city. We are what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." She paused at the door to the holding facility. "And we are what happens when you underestimate a species that refuses to give up." Velthos had no response. The door closed behind him. The war was over. Humanity had won. 3 years had passed since the destruction of São Paulo. 3 years of war. 3 years of death. 3 years of impossible victories and heartbreaking losses. The galaxy had changed. The Zelthari Empire, which had stood unchallenged for 12,000 years, was crumbling. Not quickly, not obviously, but cracks were appearing in the foundation that had once seemed eternal. It started with whispers. In the labor camps where conquered species toiled, in the servant quarters of imperial officials, in the cargo holds of transport ships, beings who had been slaves for generations began to talk about the humans. They talked about a species that said no to the Empire, a species that fought back, a species that refused to kneel. A slave named Cathor worked in the power stations of an imperial outpost. He was from a species called the Velthik. They had been conquered 8,000 years ago. For all that time, they had served. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. They had forgotten that resistance was even possible. Then Cathor heard about the Battle of the Outer Rim. A human fleet of 200 ships had engaged an Imperial armada of 600. The Imperials had expected an easy victory. Instead, they had been massacred. Over 400 Imperial vessels destroyed. The human losses had been heavy, but the survivors had withdrawn in good order, ready to fight again. Cathor did not know what to do with this information. It challenged everything he had been taught. The Empire was invincible. Resistance was futile. Accept your place and survive. But the humans were proving that all of this was a lie. More stories came. More battles. More Imperial defeats. The Empire tried to suppress the information, but it spread anyway. The conquered species had developed ways of sharing secrets over millennia of servitude. They knew how to pass messages without being detected, and the message they were passing was simple. The Empire can be beaten. On a mining world called Thorax 7, a group of Velthik workers made a decision. They would sabotage their own facility. They would destroy the power core that supplied energy to Imperial ships in 3 systems. It was a death sentence. They knew that. The Empire would execute them for their defiance. But they also knew that their actions would help the humans. It would weaken the Empire. It would bring freedom closer. "We've been dead for 8,000 years, their leader said. "At least now, our deaths will mean something." The sabotage was successful. The power core overloaded and exploded. The Imperial ships in 3 systems were left without energy. Several battles that should have been Imperial victories became Imperial defeats because their ships could not recharge their weapons. The humans noticed. They did not know who had helped them, but they knew someone had. They broadcast a message to the galaxy. "To whoever is fighting with us in the shadows, thank you. We see you. We will not forget you. When this is over, we will find you. And we will make sure your sacrifice was not in vain." That message spread through the slave populations like fire through dry grass. The humans acknowledged them. The humans appreciated them. The humans would remember them. More sabotage followed. More uprisings. On 40 different worlds, in 100 different facilities, the conquered species began to fight back. The Empire was hemorrhaging from 1,000 small wounds. High Arbiter Velthos watched his empire begin to unravel. He had sent fleet after fleet against the humans. Each one returned, diminished. Morale was collapsing. Commanders were refusing assignments to the human front. Some species that had served the Empire faithfully for millennia were showing signs of unrest. How did it come to this? He asked his advisors. 3 years ago, they were primitives who could barely reach their own moon. Now they threaten the foundations of our civilization. His advisors had no answers. They had studied the humans. They had analyzed their tactics. They had tried to understand their psychology. Nothing made sense. Humans should have surrendered after Snowpollo. Every other species would have. Every other species did. But humans were not every other species. Ambassador Kethra, who had delivered the first ultimatum to Earth 3 years ago, requested an audience with the Arbiter. She had been observing the war closely. She had a theory. "We made a mistake," she told Velthos. "We treated them like every other species we have conquered. We expected them to respond the same way. But they are different. Different how?" Velthos demanded. Kethra hesitated. What she was about to say was almost heresy. "They have something we do not. Something I do not have a word for in our language. It is like insanity, but it is not. It is like courage, but it is more than that. They believe that the future can be changed. They believe that the impossible can be made possible. And they are willing to die for that belief." Velthos stared at her. "You are saying they are insane." "I am saying they have hope," Kethra replied. "And hope is more dangerous than any weapon. We destroyed Snowpollo to teach them fear. Instead, we taught them rage. And rage, combined with hope, has made them invincible." Velthos dismissed her concerns. He was the High Arbiter of the greatest empire in galactic history. He would not be lectured about hope by a junior ambassador. But Kethra was right. And the proof was already on its way. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled. 400 ships. The survivors of a dozen major battles. Veterans who had seen things that would haunt them forever. Crews who had watched friends die and come back for more. They were heading for Zelther Prime, the Imperial homeworld. The seat of 12,000 years of tyranny. The heart of the Empire. It should have been impossible. Zelther Prime was protected by the greatest defensive network ever constructed. Orbital platforms, minefields, automated weapon stations. 10,000 ships stationed in permanent defensive positions. But Admiral Chun had something the Empire did not expect. She had friends. The conquered species had not just been sabotaging Imperial facilities. They had been gathering information. Star charts, defense codes, patrol schedules, anything that might help the humans. This information had been passed through secret channels, from slave to slave, from system to system, until it reached human intelligence officers. They had assembled a complete picture of the Imperial defenses. Every strength, every weakness, every gap. They gave us everything, Chun told her officers. Beings who have been slaves for thousands of years risked everything to help us. We cannot fail them. The attack began with precision strikes on key defensive platforms. Not random targets. Specific systems that the intelligence had identified as critical. Power junctions. Communication relays. Shield generators. The Imperial defenders were confused. How did the humans know exactly where to strike? How did they know which systems were most important? Then the sabotage began. Across Zelther Prime, in every facility where conquered species worked, things started to go wrong. Reactors overloaded. Doors jammed. Communications failed. Weapons misfired. The slaves were uprising, not with violence. They were too few and too weak for that, but with quiet, systematic destruction of everything that kept the empire functioning. Admiral Chun pressed her advantage. Her fleet pushed through gaps in the defenses that should not have existed. They destroyed platforms that should have been invincible. They reached the inner defensive ring in half the time expected. High Arbiter Velthos watched the battle unfold with growing horror. This was not possible. His homeworld was supposed to be impregnable. No enemy had reached Zelther Prime in 12,000 years. Call for reinforcements, he ordered. All available fleets. Abandon other fronts if necessary. We must save the homeworld. But the reinforcements were scattered across the galaxy. They would take days to arrive. And the humans were already in orbit. The battle lasted 6 days. It was the largest space battle in galactic history. Thousands of ships. Millions of combatants. Explosions that could be seen from the planet's surface. The celebrations lasted for weeks. On every world that had been part of the Empire, beings who had been slaves took to the streets. They danced. They sang songs that had been forbidden for centuries. They spoke languages that had been banned by imperial decree. They remembered names and stories and traditions that had almost been forgotten. Freedom had come. It felt like a dream, but dreams end. And when the celebrations faded, reality remained. 12,000 years of imperial rule had left deep scars. Entire species had forgotten how to govern themselves. Economies had been designed to serve the empire, not the beings who lived within them. Infrastructure had been built for extraction and control, not for development and growth. The transition would not be easy. Secretary General Webb, now older and grayer than he had been when Kethra first landed on Earth, addressed the galaxy in a broadcast that reached every corner of known space. "The war is over," he said. "But the work is just beginning." The Empire did not just conquer bodies. It conquered minds. It taught beings that they were worthless, that they could not survive without masters. That freedom was a punishment rather than a gift. Those lies must be unlearned. He paused, looking into the camera with tired eyes that had seen too much. Humanity does not seek to replace the Empire. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We fought because we had no choice. We won because we refused to lose. But victory is not the same as wisdom, and power is not the same as right. We learned that lesson from the Zelthari. We will not forget it. The first years after the war were difficult. On many worlds, different factions competed for control. Old grievances that had been suppressed by imperial rule resurfaced. Wars threatened to break out between species that had been neighbors for millennia. Humanity did what it could to help. They sent advisors, not armies. They offered guidance, not orders. They made it clear that every species had to find its own path forward. Freedom meant making your own choices. It also meant living with the consequences. Some species thrived. They had maintained their traditions and their identity despite centuries of oppression. When the chains came off, they knew immediately what they wanted to become. Others struggled. They had been slaves so long that they did not remember how to be anything else. They looked to humanity for direction, hoping for new masters to replace the old. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin, now serving as humanity's ambassador to the galactic community, addressed one such species personally. The Grethina had been among the first conquered by the Zelthari. 10,000 years of servitude had erased almost everything that made them unique. "We cannot tell you who to be," Chun said gently. "We can only tell you that you have the right to decide for yourselves." That right was taken from you. Now it has been returned. Use it. The Grethina elder who had requested guidance bowed his head. "But we do not know how. We have forgotten. Then remember, Chun said. Talk to your elders. Search your archives. Find the stories and songs that were banned. They are still there, hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. Your identity was not destroyed. It was buried. Dig it up. Slowly, painfully, the Grathana did exactly that. Other species followed their example. The galaxy began to heal. The Zelthari themselves faced a different challenge. They had been conquerors for 12,000 years. Their entire society was built around the idea of dominance. When that was taken away, they did not know what was left. Some wanted revenge. They whispered in dark corners about rebuilding the fleet, waiting for the right moment, striking back at the humans who had humiliated them. These voices were in the minority, but they were loud. Most Zelthari were simply lost. They had been taught from birth that they were superior to all other species. Now, they had been defeated by creatures they considered primitive. Their entire understanding of the universe had been shattered. Humanity could have punished them, could have occupied their worlds, could have treated them the way they had treated others. Instead, humanity offered something unexpected. Forgiveness, not for the leaders. High Arbiter Velthos and his inner circle were tried for war crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was guilty. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison, contemplating the suffering they had caused. But the ordinary Zelthari, the soldiers and workers and families who had simply lived their lives within the system they were born into, were treated differently. They were offered a place in the new galactic order, not as masters, not as servants, as equals. Many Zelthari could not accept this. The concept of equality was foreign to them. They retreated to their homeworld and isolated themselves from the rest of the galaxy, nursing their wounded pride. But some, especially the younger generations, began to see things differently. They met humans and other species as peers. They discovered that beings they had been taught to despise had value and worth. They began to question everything they had been raised to believe. One such Zelthari was named Vethka. She was the daughter of a minor official who had served the Empire faithfully. After the war, she had expected to be punished. Instead, she had been offered a chance to attend a new university on Earth, where students from across the galaxy came together to learn. On her first day, she met a human student named Marcus Chun. He was the grandson of Admiral Chun Wei-Lin. His family had every reason to hate the Zelthari. "Why are you being kind to me?" Vethka asked, confused. "We destroyed one of your cities. We killed millions of your people. You should want revenge." Marcus thought about the question seriously. "My grandmother told me something once. She said that hatred is a fire that burns the person holding it more than the person it's directed at. The Zelthari who destroyed Snowpalo are dead or in prison. You didn't do anything wrong. Hating you wouldn't bring back the people we lost. It would just create new suffering." Vethka did not understand. But in our culture, an insult to the family is an insult to all descendants. Revenge is expected, required. "Maybe that's something worth changing," Marcus said. "We're building a new galaxy. The old rules don't have to apply." Vethka spent years at that university. She studied history, philosophy, and something humans called psychology. She learned how the Zelthari had become what they were. She learned how other species had overcome similar darkness. She began to imagine what her people could become if they chose a different path. When she returned to Zelthar Prime, she brought those ideas with her. She was not welcomed by everyone. Many called her a traitor. Some threatened her life. But she persisted. Slowly, she gathered followers. Young Zelthari who were tired of living in the shadow of their ancestors' crimes. They wanted to build something new, something better, something worthy. It would take generations. The Zelthari had 12,000 years of dominance to unlearn. But the journey had begun. Across the galaxy, Similar transformations were happening. Species that had been enemies learned to work together. Economies that had been designed for extraction were rebuilt around cooperation. Governments that had been imposed from above were replaced with systems chosen from below. Humanity watched these changes with a mixture of pride and caution. They had not set out to remake the galaxy. They had just wanted to survive. But their survival had become a revolution, and they had responsibilities they had never expected. The Snowpollo Memorial was built on the spot where the city had once stood. The glass crater had been left untouched as a reminder, but around its edges, a monument rose. The names of the 40 million dead were inscribed on walls that stretched for kilometers. At the center, a single flame burned continuously, a symbol of the rage that had fueled humanity's resistance. Every year, on the anniversary of the destruction, beings from across the galaxy gathered at the memorial. Humans came to remember their dead. Former slaves came to honor the tragedy that had sparked their liberation. Even some Zelthari came, those who had chosen a different path, to acknowledge what their ancestors had done and to promise that it would never happen again. Secretary General Webb died 12 years after the war. He had lived long enough to see the galaxy begin to heal. At his funeral, representatives from hundreds of species gathered to pay their respects. He was buried near the Snowpollo Memorial, next to his wife, who had been killed in the demonstration. Admiral Chen Weilin lived for another 2 decades. She spent her final years writing about the war, making sure that future generations would understand what had happened and why. Her memoirs became required reading across the galaxy. Dr. Elena Vasquez was honored as one of humanity's greatest heroes. The power cores she had developed still powered human ships. The weapons she had designed were still used to defend peaceful worlds. She had died shortly after the war ended, her body finally succumbing to the stress she had put it through. But her legacy lived on. The galaxy they had all fought to create was imperfect. There was still suffering. There was still injustice. There were still beings who wanted power and were willing to hurt others to get it. But there was also hope and cooperation and the understanding that every species had value, that every being had rights, that power did not justify cruelty. 50 years after the war, a Zeltari historian named Korath published a comprehensive study of humanity. He had spent decades trying to understand how such a young species had defeated such an ancient empire. His conclusions surprised many of his readers. The humans did not win because they were stronger, he wrote. They were not. They did not win because they were smarter. They were not. They did not win because they were more technologically advanced. They most certainly were not. The humans won because they refused to accept the premise of the conflict. The Zelthari believed that the strong had the right to dominate the weak. The humans rejected this belief entirely. They did not fight to prove that they were strong. They fought to prove that strength did not matter. Every other species that the Empire conquered accepted, on some level, the Empire's logic. They believed that if they were strong enough, they too could dominate. When they failed to be strong enough, they submitted. They had accepted that submission was the natural outcome of weakness. The humans never accepted this. They believed that every being had inherent worth, regardless of strength. They believed that the weak had the right to resist the strong. They believed that losing a battle did not mean losing the war. And they believed that the universe itself was on their side, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. This is what made them dangerous. Not their weapons, not their tactics, not their willingness to die. Their refusal to accept the rules of a game they had not agreed to play. The historian's work became famous across the galaxy. It was translated into hundreds of languages. It was studied in universities and discussed in governments. It changed how many species understood the war and its aftermath. But perhaps the most important lesson was the simplest one. The Empire had believed that history was a story of the strong dominating the weak. They had believed that power was the only thing that mattered. They had believed that resistance was futile. The humans had proven them wrong. And in doing so, they had given the galaxy a new story. A story in which the weak could rise. A story in which the powerful could fall. A story in which the future was not determined by the past. This was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not their technology, not their military might, not even their victory over the Empire. They had given the galaxy hope. On the centennial of the Snow Polo attack, a ceremony was held at the memorial. Representatives from over 500 species attended. The glass crater had become a park now, the residual radiation long since cleaned away. Children played on grass where millions had died. A young human woman stood before the crowd. Her name was Maria Webb. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Secretary General Marcus Webb. She had been chosen to deliver the commemoration address. 100 years ago, she began, the Empire believed they could break us with fire. They believed that killing enough of us would teach us our place. They believed that we would kneel. She looked out at the assembled beings, representing species from across the galaxy. They were wrong. We did not kneel. We fought. We bled. We died in numbers that still break my heart to imagine. But we did not stop. We refused to accept the future they had chosen for us. We decided to write our own story. She gestured at the crowd. And look at what we have built together. A galaxy where 100 species cooperate instead of conquer. A civilization where the weak are protected instead of exploited. A future where our children can look at the stars and see opportunities instead of threats. Her voice grew stronger. The Empire ruled for 12,000 years. They believed they would rule forever. But we taught them that nothing is forever. We taught them that tyranny always falls. We taught them that the universe does not belong to the strong. It belongs to those who refuse to give up. She turned to face the eternal flame that burned at the center of the memorial. To the 40 million who died here, we remember you. Your deaths were not in vain. The rage you sparked burned down an empire and built a better galaxy from the ashes. Every child who plays in this park, every being who lives free across the stars, every species that determines its own fate, they all owe you a debt that can never be repaid. She bowed her head in silence for a moment. Then she looked up again. But the best way to honor the dead is to live the values they died for. So today, on this anniversary, I ask everyone listening to remember not just what humanity lost, but what we all gained. Remember that the impossible is always possible. Remember that the future is not written. Remember that every being has worth, and every species has the right to determine its own destiny. She smiled, the first smile anyone had seen at the memorial in 100 years. And remember that when someone tells you to kneel, you can always say no. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then slowly applause began. It spread through the assembled beings until it became a roar. Species that had been enemies for centuries cheered together. Victims and perpetrators, liberators and liberated, all united in recognition of what had been achieved. The memorial would stand for centuries more. The names on its walls would be read by beings who had never known the dead. The story of Snow Polo would be told and retold until it became legend. But the most important part of the story was not the tragedy. It was what came after. When humanity encountered the Galactic Empire, the Empire expected submission. They expected fear. They expected to add another species to their list of conquests. Instead, they got something they never imagined. They got an enemy that refused to stay broken. They got a species that believed tomorrow could be better than today. They got humanity. And in the end, the Empire stood defeated and humiliated. Not because humanity was stronger. Not because humanity was smarter. Not because humanity was more advanced. But because humanity was stubborn. Because humanity was hopeful. Because humanity refused to kneel. And that made all the difference.